After driving for 8 hours in a record-breaking snowstorm with my arthritis screaming in every joint just to celebrate Christmas with my only daughter. I walked up to the front door and froze. I heard my son-in-law laughing inside. "I hope that old rust bucket broke down on the highway," he said. It would be a Christmas miracle if we did not have to look at his dirty face tonight. Then I heard my daughter laugh with him. I stood there for a moment feeling the cold seep into my bones, then I quietly closed the storm door and walked back to my truck. I looked at the $2 million check in my pocket and tore it into pieces. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know which city you are watching from in the comments below. My name is Horace Freeman, and I am 68 years old. To the outside world, and especially to my own family, I am just a retired truck driver living on a pension, struggling to keep an old Ford running. They see my calloused hands and my worn-out coat, and they assume I am nothing but a burden. What they do not know is that I am the founder and majority shareholder of Freeman Logistics, one of the largest transportation networks in the country. I built an empire from a single delivery van, but I kept my wealth hidden because my late wife Lucille always told me that money attracts parasites, but character attracts family. Tonight I found out exactly which one I was raising. The drive to Vermont had been a battle for survival against nature itself. For 8 hours I fought through a whiteout blizzard that had forced even the snowplows off the interstate. My 1998 Ford F-150 was shaking violently against the wind, the heater rattling and coughing out air that was barely lukewarm. The temperature outside had dropped to 15 degrees below zero, but inside the cab it felt even colder. Every time I pressed the brake pedal, a sharp electric jolt of pain shot through my right knee. My arthritis was flaring up worse than it had in years, punishing me for sitting in one position for so long. I could have flown private. I could have sent a luxury SUV with a driver to pick me up. I could have arrived in a helicopter if I wanted to, but that was not who I was. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned ashen gray. I did this because I wanted to be a father, not a bank account. I wanted Jasmine to welcome me because she missed her dad, not because she missed his wallet. The wind howled against the windshield, threatening to push the old truck into the ditch. I kept seeing Lucille's face in my mind. She would have scolded me for driving in this weather, but she also would have been right there beside me holding a thermos of coffee. "Horace, stay humble," she used to say. "Never let the gold blind you to the grandeur of the soul." I was suffering in this freezing metal box to honor her memory and to protect my daughter from the curse of easy money. My body was breaking down. My back throbbed with a dull ache and my eyes burned from staring into the endless white void of the highway. But I kept driving. I was a father on a mission. I pulled into the last rest stop about 20 miles from their house just to feel my legs again. The parking lot was desolate, buried under a foot of fresh snow. The engine sputtered and died when I turned the key off, and for a moment the silence was deafening. I turned on the overhead light, which flickered weakly, and reached into the inside pocket of my heavy coat. My fingers, which were stiff from the cold, brushed against the thick envelope. I pulled it out and stared at it. Inside was a certified cashier's check for $2 million. It was not just money, it was a piece of my soul. I had sold 5% of my preferred stock last week, a quiet transaction that barely made a ripple on Wall Street but meant the world to me. I took out the letter I had written to go with it. My handwriting was a bit shaky, not from age but from emotion. The letter explained everything. It explained that this money was to pay off their mortgage so they would never have to worry about a roof over their heads. It was to pay off Hunter's student loans and the credit card debt Jasmine had hinted at during our phone calls. I sat there in the dim light, imagining the scene. I pictured Jasmine opening the envelope. I saw the shock on her face, then the tears. I imagined her running to me, hugging me tight, burying her face in my shoulder like she did when she was 6 years old. "Daddy, you saved us," she would say. That fantasy was the only thing keeping me warm. I rubbed my hands together, blowing hot breath into them. I was not doing this to buy their love. I was doing it to give them freedom. I wanted Hunter to stop stressing about his finance job. I wanted Jasmine to breathe easier. I took a sip of the coffee I had brought from home, but it was stone cold and bitter. It did not matter. The warmth in my chest came from the anticipation of being the hero in disguise. I carefully tucked the check and the letter back into my pocket right next to my heart. I restarted the truck, praying the old engine would turn over. It groaned, protested, but finally roared to life. "Just 20 more miles," I whispered to myself. "Just 20 more miles, and I will be home." When I finally pulled into their long, winding driveway, the snow had stopped falling, but the wind was still whipping around the house. It was a beautiful modern home, large and imposing, with massive windows that glowed with golden light. It was the kind of house I had paid for indirectly through years of generous gifts that they thought came from my pension savings. I parked my truck far down the driveway so the oil leak would not stain their pristine pavement. I grabbed my duffel bag and limped toward the front porch. The pain in my knee was excruciating now, a throbbing agony with every step, but I forced a smile onto my face. I was finally here. I reached for the door handle and realized it was unlocked. I was about to push it open and shout "Merry Christmas" when a voice stopped me dead in my tracks. It was Hunter. His voice was loud, booming, and dripping with arrogance, carrying clearly through the thin wood of the storm door. "I swear if that old man actually shows up, I am going to lose it," Hunter said. The sound of clinking glass followed. "You saw that truck he drives, right? It is an eyesore. I hope the transmission blew out on the highway. It would be a favor to the neighborhood property values." I froze. My hand hovered over the handle. I waited for Jasmine to defend me. I waited for my little girl to tell her husband to stop speaking about her father that way. Instead, I heard a soft, nervous laugh. "Oh, stop it, Hunter," she said, but there was no anger in her voice, only compliance. "He is just trying to be a good dad. But yeah, I know what you mean. I just hope he does not try to tell those boring trucking stories again in front of your friends." It is so embarrassing. Embarrassing. The word hung in the freezing air like a guillotine blade. Then another voice, a stranger, spoke up. "Why do you even invite him if he is such a drag?" "Because we need him to sign the papers." Hunter laughed, and the sound was ugly and cruel. "I need that old fool to sign over the deed to his Chicago house. Once we get that asset, he can rot in a state home for all I care." My heart did not break, it shattered. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed the life out of me. I stood there on the porch, snow gathering on my shoulders, looking at the warm glow of the window. I saw them inside, holding glasses of expensive wine, laughing. They looked so beautiful and so monstrous. My hand, which was shaking uncontrollably, now dropped to my side. It wasn't the cold making me shake. It was a rage so deep and so ancient it felt like magma. I did not open the door. I did not storm in and scream. That would have been too easy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. The $2 million. The freedom. The love. I looked at it one last time. Then with slow, deliberate movements, I tore the envelope in half. Then in half again. And again. I let the pieces of paper fall from my hand. The wind caught them immediately, scattering $2 million of confetti into the dark, snowy night. I turned my back on the house that was no longer a home and began the long, painful walk back to my truck. The engine started with a roar, and as I backed out of the driveway, I made a promise to myself. They wanted the old truck driver to be gone. Well, he was gone. And the man who was coming back for them was someone they had never met before. I sat in that freezing truck for another 15 minutes, not because I was afraid to go in, but because I was preparing for a merger. That is how I had to see it. This was no longer a family Christmas dinner. This was a hostile takeover, and I was the undercover auditor. In the world of logistics and high-stakes transport, you learn quickly that information is more valuable than gold. If I walked in there screaming about the disrespect I just heard, I would lose my advantage. They would gaslight me. They would say I was hearing things or that it was just a joke. No, I needed more than words. I needed evidence. I needed to see exactly how deep the rot went when they thought I was too old and too stupid to notice. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked tired and red from the drive, which was perfect. I ruffled my gray hair to make it look unkempt. I pulled the collar of my worn-out coat up high to hide the fact that the shirt underneath was actually high-quality cotton. I slumped my shoulders forward. I practiced the look of a man who has been beaten down by life. A man who needs help. A man who is vulnerable. It was a mask I had worn many times in business negotiations to make my competitors underestimate me. But God, it hurt to wear it for my own daughter. I took a deep breath of the frigid air, letting it sting my lungs one last time. "Showtime, Horace," I whispered to myself. "You are not a CEO tonight. You are just a broke old truck driver looking for a handout. Let us see how they treat the man, not the bank account." I stepped out of the truck and limped deliberately toward the house. I made sure to drag my left leg a little more than necessary. When I rang the doorbell, I waited. I knew they were in there composing themselves, getting their masks ready just like I had. The door swung open, and a blast of warm air hitting my face, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and pine needles. Hunter stood there framing the doorway like he was posing for a magazine cover. The transformation was terrifyingly impressive. The sneer I had heard in his voice moments ago was gone, completely replaced by a wide, beaming smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Dad," he boomed, his voice filled with a performance of relief. "Oh, thank God you made it. We were getting so worried about you out there in this storm." He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, but it was not a hug. It was a performance. His body remained stiff and distant, his chest barely grazing my coat. It was the kind of hug you give a wet dog when you are wearing a tuxedo. He patted my back twice with a flat hand, a universal signal for, "Let go of me now." I felt him recoil slightly when the dampness of my snowy coat touched his cashmere sweater. I smelled him before I saw him clearly. He reeked of sandalwood and expensive whiskey, a cologne that probably cost more than my monthly heating bill. It was the smell of money that he did not earn. Come in," Hunter said, ushering me into the foyer but blocking my path to the white carpet until I took off my boots. I looked past him and saw Jasmine. She was standing by the staircase wearing a red silk dress that looked beautiful on her. She was twisting her wedding ring round and round on her finger, a nervous habit she had since she was a teenager. She could not look me in the eye. She looked at my boots. She looked at the wall. She looked at Hunter. But she could not look at her father. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly. Her voice sounded thin and fragile. "I am glad the truck made it." I wanted to shake her. I wanted to scream, "I heard you laughing," but I just smiled my sad, tired smile. "Me too, baby girl," I said, my voice cracking just enough to sell the act. Old Bessie struggled a bit on the highway, but she got me here. Hunter let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a bark. "Well, let us get that coat off you. We have guests, Horace. Important people. Try to tidy up a bit in the powder room, would you?" He took my coat with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated with a disease and hung it quickly in the closet, pushing it deep into the back behind the guests' fur coats. I walked to the bathroom and washed my face. I looked into my own eyes in the mirror. The anger was a burning coal in my gut, but I swallowed it down. I walked out into the living room, ready for the second act. The living room was spectacular. A 12-foot Christmas tree touched the vaulted ceiling, shimmering with crystal ornaments. A roaring fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Standing around the room were about a dozen people holding wine glasses. They were all young, white, and wealthy. The men wore blazers that fit too perfectly, and the women wore jewelry that glittered in the firelight. When I entered the room, the conversation died down. Heads turned. Eyes scanned me up and down, analyzing my flannel shirt and my work pants. I saw the judgment. It was swift and silent. I was an anomaly, a glitch in their perfect aesthetic. "Everyone listen up," Hunter announced, clapping his hands together to command the room. "I want you to meet my father-in-law, Horace." He walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. The grip was firm, almost painful. He was claiming ownership of me like I was a prop. "Horace is a salt-of-the-earth kind of guy." Hunter continued, his voice dripping with that patronizing tone people use for children or pets. "He drove a truck for 40 years. Can you imagine? 40 years on the road. A real, simple, hard-working man." He emphasized the word simple like it was a synonym for stupid. He emphasized hard-working like it was a synonym for lower class. The guests smiled polite, tight-lipped smiles. They nodded at me. "Nice to meet you, Horace," a young man with slicked-back hair said, without stepping forward to shake my hand. I just nodded. "Nice to meet you all," I said, keeping my head down. "Dinner is served," Jasmine announced from the dining room, her voice overly bright. We moved into the dining hall. The table was set for a king. Fine china, silver cutlery, and crystal glasses reflected the candlelight. There were name cards at every seat. I scanned the table, looking for my name. I saw Hunter at the head of the table. I saw Jasmine to his right. I saw the guests filling the long sides. I walked all the way to the end, and there was no chair for me. "Oh, sorry, Dad," Jasmine said, rushing over, her face flushing pink. "We ran out of space at the main table because the Millers brought a +1. She pointed to a small plastic folding table set up in the corner near the kitchen door. It was the kind of table you use for toddlers at Thanksgiving. It was lower than the main table, and it had a paper napkin instead of linen. "It is actually better over there," Hunter said, taking his seat at the head of the table like a monarch. "You will have more elbow room, Dad, and you are closer to the kitchen if you need a refill on your beer." "I do not drink beer," I said quietly. Hunter waved his hand dismissively. Right. Whatever. Just get comfortable." I sat down at the plastic table. My knees hit the bottom of it. I looked like a giant trying to sit in a dollhouse. From my vantage point, I could see the entire table. I watched them laughing and passing bread baskets. I was in the room, but I was not of the room. I was the hired help that they had forgotten to dismiss. Hunter stood up holding a bottle of wine. I recognized the label immediately from across the room. It was a Chateau Margaux 2015. It was a legendary vintage. My company, Freeman Logistics, had handled the exclusive import contract for that specific wine for the entire Midwest region. I knew exactly how many temperature-controlled containers were used to ship it. I knew the insurance premiums on every crate. I knew that bottle cost more than Hunter made in a week. He held the bottle by the neck like a barbarian. He did not support the base. He did not present the label. He just popped the cork with a loud thud and started splashing it into glasses, filling them to the brim as if it were cheap soda. "This is the good stuff, guys," Hunter announced loudly. "Only the best for my friends." He made his way around the table and finally came to my corner. He looked at my empty glass. He hesitated. "Do you want some Horace?" he asked, his tone suggesting that I would not appreciate it. "It is pretty dry, not like the sweet stuff you probably buy at the gas station." I looked at the bottle. I looked at him. "I will try a little," I said. He poured a small amount, barely covering the bottom of the glass. He smirked. "Don't knock it back all at once," he said, winking at his friends. "That sip cost $50. I watched him walk away. I lifted the glass to my nose. The aroma was complex, rich, with notes of blackcurrant and violets. It smelled like success. It smelled like the empire I built. And as I took a sip, sitting at a plastic table in the corner while my son-in-law mocked me, I realized something. He was drinking my wine. He was living in my house. He was spending my money, and he thought he was the king. I swirled the wine in the glass, watching the deep red liquid coat the sides. "Enjoy it while you can, Hunter," I thought, "because the hangover you are going to have tomorrow will last for the rest of your life." The dinner party eventually wound down, and the guests left with their bellies full of my wine and their heads full of Hunter's exaggerated stories. I watched them go from my little plastic table in the corner, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. When the last luxury sedan pulled away, Hunter turned to me. His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer exhaustion, as if pretending to be a decent human being had drained all his energy. "All right, Horace. Time for bed," Hunter said, checking his Rolex. "We do not have a guest room set up on the main floor because we are turning it into a home gym, so we set you up downstairs. It is private down there. You will like it." He opened a narrow door off the kitchen that I had assumed was a pantry. A gust of cold, stale air rushed up to meet us, carrying the unmistakable scent of mildew and damp earth. I followed him down the wooden stairs, which groaned under my weight. The basement was unfinished. The floor was bare concrete that radiated a bone-chilling cold through the soles of my boots. There was no insulation on the walls, just exposed studs and pipes that dripped condensation. In the corner, sitting directly on the concrete, was a rusty metal cot with a thin mattress that looked like it had been salvaged from a prison yard. "Here you go," Hunter said, flipping a switch that turned on a single naked bulb hanging from a wire. "Bathroom is upstairs. Try not to flush in the middle of the night because it wakes up the dog." He turned and bounded up the stairs, closing the door behind him with a decisive click. I stood there in the center of the room, shivering as the cold immediately began to gnaw at my arthritic joints. I sat down on the cot and the springs screamed in protest. I looked around this dungeon and I could not help but laugh, a dry, bitter laugh. My mind drifted to my apartment in Chicago. It is a 5,000-square-foot penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. It has heated marble floors that keep your feet warm even in the dead of winter. It has a master suite with a fireplace and a bed that feels like sleeping on a cloud. I have a staff of 3 who ensure that fresh flowers are placed in every room daily. Yet here I was, the owner of a logistics empire, shivering in a damp basement while my son-in-law's purebred golden retriever slept on a memory foam orthopedic bed in the climate-controlled living room upstairs. They treated the dog with more dignity than they treated the man who paid for the roof over their heads. The dog was a status symbol. I was just an inconvenient relative who took up space. I lay down on the lumpy mattress, pulling my coat tight around me because there were no blankets. I stared at the cobwebs dancing in the draft from the ceiling and felt a single tear trace a cold path down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of clarity. I must have dozed off for an hour or so before a burning thirst woke me up. My throat felt like sandpaper. I sat up groaning as my knee seized up in the damp cold. I needed water. I stood up and navigated the dim room, guided only by the sliver of light coming from under the door at the top of the stairs. As I moved toward the corner of the room to find a light switch, I tripped over something heavy. I stumbled and caught myself against a stack of cardboard boxes. I cursed softly, rubbing my shin. I squinted in the gloom. These were not just random boxes. They looked familiar. I reached out and brushed the dust off the top one. Written on the side in my own handwriting were the words, "Study books and records." My heart skipped a beat. When Jasmine and Hunter moved into this house 2 years ago, I had given them my most prized possessions for safekeeping while I renovated my old cabin. I had entrusted them with the things that mattered most to me. My hands trembling, I ripped the tape off the top box. Inside was a tragedy. My collection of vintage jazz records, which I had spent 40 years curating, was thrown in there haphazardly. I pulled out a first pressing of Miles Davis' Kinda Blue. It was a record worth thousands of dollars, but to me it was priceless because Lucille and I had danced to it on our first anniversary. The sleeve was bent and torn. I pulled the record out. It was cracked down the middle. Ruined. I dug deeper. My rare books, first editions of African American literature that I planned to donate to a museum one day, were piled underneath heavy tools. The spines were broken, the pages crinkled from the dampness of the basement. I frantically opened the next box. This one hit me harder than a physical blow. It was the family photo albums. I pulled out the wedding album from 1985. The leather cover was gnawed at the corners. Mouse droppings fell out as I opened it. I saw a picture of Lucille holding Jasmine as a baby, a majestic, beautiful moment. But moisture had seeped into the box and the photo was warped, the colors bleeding together, turning my wife's beautiful face into a distorted smear. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This was not just negligence. This was violence. They had taken the history of my life, the evidence that I had loved and been loved, and they had thrown it into a damp corner to rot. Then I saw it. A bright neon yellow sticky note slapped carelessly onto the side of the box containing my late wife's china. The handwriting was Hunter's, sharp and angular. It read, "Trash garage sale, leftovers, Monday pickup." I stared at those words until they blurred. Trash. My life's work. My memories. My wife's legacy. To them, it was just clutter. It was just garbage to be hauled away to make room for a gym or a pool table. They were not just waiting for me to die. They had already buried me. They had erased Horace Freeman the man and replaced him with Horace the nuisance. I touched the ruined record sleeve gently as if apologizing to an old friend. I carefully placed it back in the box. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I simply felt the last remaining ember of hope for this family turn into cold, hard ash. A few minutes later, I heard the door at the top of the stairs creak open. Light flooded down the steps, followed by the soft padding of slippered feet. It was Jasmine. She was wearing a thick plush robe and holding a thin, scratchy wool blanket in her arms. "Dad," she whispered, peering into the gloom. "Are you awake? I brought you a blanket. It gets a little chilly down here." I stood up, blocking the view of the boxes with my body. I watched her come down the stairs. She looked tired. Her makeup was washed off, and without the facade, she looked younger but also more worn down. She handed me the blanket, keeping her distance. "Thanks," I said, taking the rough fabric. "It is a bit more than chilly, Jasmine. I think I saw your breath over there." She hugged herself, looking at the floor. "I know, Dad. I am sorry. Hunter is just... He is very particular about the upstairs. He likes everything to be perfect for guests." I stepped aside, revealing the stack of boxes behind me. I saw her eyes widen in panic. She recognized them instantly. "I found my things, Jasmine," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. "The records. Mom's albums." I saw the note. "Monday pickup." She flinched as if I had raised a hand to her. She began to stammer, her hands twisting the belt of her robe. "No, Dad. No, that is not what it looks like," she said, the lie spilling out of her clumsily. We were reorganizing. We brought them down here to sort through them, to keep them safe. We were going to put them in storage, a nice storage unit, climate-controlled." I reached down and picked up the cracked Miles Davis record. I held it up. "Is this keeping it safe?" I asked. She looked at the broken vinyl and tears welled up in her eyes. But they were not tears of sorrow for the record. They were tears of fear. She glanced nervously up the stairs toward the kitchen door where Hunter was sleeping. "Please, Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please do not make a scene. Hunter gets so angry when things are messy. He says all this old stuff. He says it brings down the energy of the house. He threw a fit last week because the boxes were in the garage. I did not know what to do. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the woman who used to run to the door when I came home from work. I did not see a partner in that marriage. I saw a hostage. She was terrified of him. She was terrified of his judgment, of his anger, of his moods. She had let him bully her into erasing her own past. She had let him convince her that her father's legacy was trash just to keep the peace. "You are scared of him, aren't you?" I asked softly. She wiped her eyes quickly, sniffing. "No, I love him. He just has high standards. You do not understand, Dad." "His world is different. I understand perfectly, Jasmine," I said, dropping the record back into the box. "I understand that you have let a small man make you feel small. I understand that you are trading your soul for a lifestyle you cannot afford." She stiffened, her defensive walls going back up. "You should get some sleep, Dad," she said, turning away abruptly. "We have a big day tomorrow. Please, just leave the boxes alone." She hurried up the stairs, leaving me in the darkness. I wrapped the thin, scratchy blanket around my shoulders. It offered no warmth. I sat back down on the cot, listening to the house settle above me. She thought I was a helpless old man who needed to be managed. She thought the only power I had was the power to embarrass her. She had no idea that the man sitting in her basement was about to buy the bank that held her mortgage. She had no idea that I was not just going to leave the boxes alone. I was going to use them to burn their house of cards to the ground. The cold in the basement was not just a temperature. It was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. At 5 in the morning, my arthritis woke me up with a vengeance. My knees felt like they were filled with crushed glass, and my lower back was a knot of throbbing iron. I lay there on the rusty cot, listening to the silence of the house. It was that heavy gray hour before dawn, when the world feels suspended in time. I needed to move. I needed to walk just to get the blood flowing again, or I would be crippled by the time the sun came up. I threw off the thin, scratchy blanket and sat up. My breath hung in the air like a ghost. I put on my boots because the concrete floor was freezing, and slowly, painfully made my way up the wooden stairs. Every step was a negotiation with gravity. I did not turn on the light. I knew how to move in the dark. 40 years of driving trucks through the night had given me cat eyes. I reached the kitchen door and opened it just a crack. I intended to just get a glass of water and maybe find a corner to stretch in, but a sound stopped me. It was a voice, low, urgent, and filled with a panic that I recognized immediately. It was the sound of a man who was drowning and trying to hide it. I crept closer to the study door, which was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I saw Hunter. He was pacing back and forth in his pajamas, his hair messy, his hand gripping a cell phone so tight his knuckles were white. "Listen to me. You cannot call the house line," Hunter hissed into the phone. "I told you I am working on it. It is Christmas morning, for God's sake. Do you people have no soul?" I pressed my ear closer to the doorframe. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the thrill of the hunt. I was no longer the old father-in-law. I was the CEO doing due diligence. "I do not care what the contract says," Hunter whispered, shouting. "I need 30 days. Just give me 30 days. I have an asset coming in, a liquid asset. I'm going to sell a property in Chicago. It is a done deal. I just need time to get the signature." My blood ran cold. He was talking about my house. He was selling a property he did not own yet. He was promising my legacy to a shark on the other end of the line. Then came the numbers that tell the real story. "I know I owe $500,000, Hunter said, his voice cracking. "I know the foreclosure notice is in the mail. Just intercept it. Please, if my wife sees it, I am dead. Look, I am not a vice president yet, but the promotion is coming. I am just an analyst right now, but I am next in line." I leaned back against the kitchen counter, letting the information sink in. $500,000 in debt. Foreclosure. And the biggest lie of all. He was not a vice president of anything. He was a low-level analyst. A paper pusher. He had built this entire life, this facade of luxury cars and expensive wines, on a foundation of lies and credit card debt. He was not just broke. He was underwater, and he was looking for a life raft. And I was the life raft. I was the unsuspecting victim he planned to drown to save himself. I quietly retreated to the kitchen island and poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady despite the rage burning inside me. I drank it slowly, watching the sun begin to bleed through the curtains. I had him. I had the leverage I needed, but I could not reveal my hand yet. I had to let him play his part. I had to let him think he was the smartest man in the room until the very last second. 2 hours later, the kitchen was filled with the smell of frying bacon and expensive coffee. Jasmine was bustling around the stove, cooking a breakfast fit for royalty. Pancakes, eggs, sausages, fruit. It was a performance of domestic perfection. I sat at the small breakfast nook table, sipping black coffee, watching them. Hunter came down the stairs, a transformed man. He had showered, shaved, and put on a crisp polo shirt and khakis. The panicked, desperate man I had seen at 5 a.m. was gone. In his place was the master of the universe. He breezed into the kitchen, kissed Jasmine on the cheek, and clapped his hands together. "Good morning, family," he boomed, pouring himself a massive mug of coffee. "What a day. The market never sleeps, you know. Even on Christmas, I have got guys in Tokyo calling me about the merger." He sat down at the head of the table and started piling food onto his plate. He did not ask if I wanted any. He just ate with a greed that was almost impressive. "So Horace," Hunter said, talking with his mouth full, "you probably do not follow the financial news much, being retired and all, but it is a bear market out there. Brutal. You have to know when to leverage your assets. Synergy. That is the key." I took a sip of my coffee, hiding my smile behind the mug. He was using words he had heard on television, but he was using them wrong. You do not leverage assets in a bear market to create synergy. That is gibberish. It is the kind of talk that impresses people who know nothing about money. But I had built a logistics empire that moved millions of dollars of cargo every day. I knew more about leverage than he would ever learn in a lifetime. "Is that so?" I asked, playing the part of the confused old man. "Sounds complicated. I just keep my money in the bank. Safe and sound." Hunter laughed condescendingly. "The bank. That is cute, Horace. But inflation is eating you alive. You need to be aggressive. You need to put your capital to work." "That is what I do. I take stagnant assets and I make them perform." Stagnant assets. He was talking about me. He was talking about my house, my savings, my life. To him, I was just a stagnant asset waiting to be liquidated. I watched Jasmine place a fresh stack of pancakes on his plate. She looked at him with such adoration, such blind faith. She believed the lie. She believed he was a financial genius who was providing this castle for her. She did not know the castle was made of sand and the tide was coming in fast. I decided it was time to test the waters, time to see just how desperate these sharks really were. I put my coffee mug down with a heavy clunk. I cleared my throat, looking down at my hands as if I were embarrassed. "You know, Hunter," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "all this talk about money makes me nervous. I have been thinking. I am getting old. My knees are bad. I do not know how much longer I can live alone in Chicago." The room went silent. The only sound was the fork scraping against Hunter's plate. He stopped chewing. He looked at me, and I saw his pupils dilate. It was the look of a predator spotting a wounded gazelle. "What do you mean, Dad?" Jasmine asked, stepping closer to the table. Well, I continued, keeping my eyes down. "I sold my truck last week. The big one. And I cashed out my retirement savings. I brought it with me. It is in my duffel bag downstairs, $50,000 in cash. I wanted to, well, I do not know what I wanted. I just wanted to keep it safe. Maybe give it to you to help with the house." The effect was instantaneous. It was like magic. $50,000. Hunter repeated the number, rolling off his tongue like honey. He put his fork down. He wiped his mouth with a napkin. He stood up and walked over to me. His face, which had been dismissive and arrogant all morning, softened into a mask of pure concern. He put a hand on my shoulder. A gentle, loving hand. "Horace," he said, his voice dripping with fake empathy. "You should have told us sooner. You should not be carrying that much cash around. It is dangerous." Jasmine rushed over and poured more coffee into my empty cup. "Here, Dad, have some fresh coffee," she said. "And you have not eaten anything. Let me get you a plate. Do you want blueberry syrup? I know it is your favorite." Suddenly, I was not the nuisance in the basement. I was the guest of honor. Hunter pulled out a chair next to him. "Come sit over here, Horace," he said, patting the seat. "The light is better. We can talk. 50,000 is a good start. I can help you invest that. I can double it for you in 6 months. We can put it into the house fund. It would be the smart thing to do. I moved to the chair, my bad knee aching, but my heart cold as stone. I watched them fawning over me, passing me the butter, offering me the best pieces of bacon. They were not feeding me. They were feeding the ATM machine. They thought they had won. They thought the old man had just handed over his life savings. I took a bite of the pancake. It tasted like ash, but I chewed it slowly, forcing a smile. "That sounds wonderful, Hunter," I said. "I would love for you to help me. I trust you." I saw Hunter exchange a look with Jasmine, a look of victory, a look that said we got him. I smiled back at them, my eyes crinkling at the corners. Eat up, I thought. Enjoy your victory lap, because the check I tore up last night was for $2 million. And the $50,000 I just mentioned. It does not exist. But by the time you figure that out, I will own everything you think is yours. The fish has bitten the hook, and now it is time to reel him in. The snow had finally stopped falling, leaving the world covered in a thick blanket of white silence. I stood by the back door of the kitchen, watching my grandson Leo through the glass. He was 8 years old, sitting on the expensive heated patio furniture, wrapped in a designer parka, staring blankly at the screen of an iPad. He looked so much like his mother did at that age, the same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin. My heart swelled with a mixture of love and nervous anticipation. I adjusted my coat, ignoring the sharp throb in my knee, and stepped out into the crisp winter air. In my large, rough hands, I held a gift that was worth more to me than any check I could write. It was a toy truck carved from a solid block of oak. I had spent the last 3 months in my workshop crafting it. I had sanded every curve until the wood was smooth as silk. I had oiled it until it glowed with a deep, warm amber hue. I had even carved tiny little details into the dashboard and the wheels, working with a magnifying glass to get it perfect. It was a replica of the very first delivery truck I bought 40 years ago, the truck that started the Freeman Empire. I wanted to give it to Leo, not just as a toy, but as a symbol. I wanted to tell him that great things start small. I wanted to tell him that his grandfather built a legacy with these 2 hands, and that one day he could build something too. I walked across the crunching snow, my boots leaving deep tracks. The cold air filled my lungs, but the warmth of the moment kept me going. I imagined his eyes lighting up. I imagined us sitting together on the bench, me explaining how the wheels turned and him asking questions. I wanted to bridge the gap that his father had created between us. I wanted to be a grandfather. "Leo," I called out softly, trying not to startle him. He did not look up. He kept swiping his finger across the glass screen, deeply absorbed in some brightly colored game. "Leo." "It is, Grandpa," I said, moving closer. "Look what I have for you." I sat down on the bench opposite him. The wood groaned under my weight. Leo finally looked up. His expression was not one of excitement or curiosity. It was a look of annoyance, a look of boredom. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice flat. I forced a smile, suppressing the hurt. "I brought you something special, Leo. I made it myself, just for you." I held out the wooden truck. The sunlight caught the polished oak, making it shine. It was beautiful. It was sturdy. It was real. Leo glanced at it. He did not reach for it. He did not put down his iPad. He just stared at the toy with a mixture of confusion and disgust. "It is wood," he said, wrinkling his nose. "Why is it brown?" "It is oak," I explained, my voice wavering slightly. "It is the strongest wood there is. And look, the wheels move. I carved it to look just like the truck I used to drive when I was a young man." I reached out to place it in his hands, hoping that once he touched it, once he felt the weight and the smoothness of it, he would understand. But he recoiled. He pulled his hands back into his sleeves as if the truck were made of toxic waste. "I do not want it," he said loudly. My hand froze in midair. "Why not, Leo? It is a good truck. It will last forever." Leo looked me dead in the eye, and in that moment I did not see an 8-year-old boy. I saw a miniature version of Hunter. I saw the same arrogance, the same learned cruelty reflecting back at me. "Daddy says you have dirty hands," Leo stated matter-of-factly. I blinked, stunned. "What?" "Daddy says your hands are dirty because you work with garbage," Leo continued, reciting the words he had clearly heard many times before. "He says you are a failure. He says only poor people make their own toys because they cannot afford the real ones from the store." The words hit me harder than the blizzard winds. They cut through my coat and skin and pierced straight into my heart. I looked at my hands, the hands that had steered wheels through hurricanes, the hands that had signed million-dollar contracts, the hands that had held his mother when she was born. They were clean, they were strong. But to this child, they were the mark of a lower caste. Leo the First whispered, my voice trembling. That is not true. Making things is a special talent. It means you are smart. It means you are strong. No, it does not. Leo snapped. Daddy says you are just a truck driver. He says you are a peasant. I do not want your peasant toy. It probably has germs on it. With a sudden violent motion, he swatted the truck out of my hand. The heavy oak toy flew through the air and landed with a muffled thud in a snowbank 3 feet away. It lay there half buried, looking like a piece of debris. I sat there frozen. The silence in the yard was deafening. Leo went back to his iPad as if nothing had happened, as if he had just swatted away a fly. I looked at the boy I loved and I realized with a sickening clarity that he was gone. They had taken him from me. They had not just poisoned his mind against me, they had poisoned his soul against the very idea of labor, of humility, of dignity. Hunter had taught his son that a man's worth is measured by the softness of his hands and the brand of his clothes. He was raising a monster who would grow up to treat people like commodities just like his father. I slowly stood up. My knees screamed in agony, but I barely felt it. The physical pain was nothing compared to the amputation of my spirit I had just endured. I walked over to the snowbank. I bent down and picked up the wooden truck. I wiped the snow off the hood. I put it back in my pocket. I would not leave it there. Not. It deserved better. And so did I. I turned and walked back into the house. I did not look at Leo again. There was nothing to say to a child who had already been indoctrinated. The war was no longer about winning his love. It was about destroying the teacher who had corrupted him. I walked straight through the kitchen, ignoring Jasmine, who was arranging flowers by the window. I walked into the small powder room off the hallway and locked the door. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run loudly to create a barrier of sound. I gripped the marble sink with both hands, staring at myself in the mirror. The sad old man with the hopeful eyes was gone. The grandfather who wanted to build bridges was dead. Staring back at me was Horace Freeman, the CEO. The predator who had eaten competitors alive for breakfast for 40 years. My eyes were cold, hard flint. My breathing was steady. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a sleek black satellite phone that I kept for emergencies. This was an emergency. This was a rescue mission for the soul of my family, and I was going to burn the village to save it. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once. Mr. Freeman, a crisp, professional voice answered. This is unexpected. Is everything all right, sir? It was my chief of staff calling from my private office in Chicago. No, David. Everything is not all right, I said, my voice dropping an octave devoid of any warmth. I need you to open a file. Target name is Hunter Calloway. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. I have him, sir, the son-in-law. I want a full forensic audit of his life. I commanded my words sharp and precise. I want to know where he works, who his boss is, and exactly how much debt he is carrying. Run a credit check deep dive. I want to know about every parking ticket, every late payment, every lie he has ever told on a loan application. Understood, Sir David replied, his tone shifting to match mine. What is the objective? The objective is total acquisition, I said, looking at my reflection. I want you to buy his debt. All of it. The mortgage, the credit cards, the car loans. If he owes money to a lemonade stand, I want to own the stand. Find out who holds the note on this house and buy it. Offer them 20% above market value for the paper if you have to. I want to be the one he writes the check to at the end of the month. I understand, sir. Anything else? Yes, I said, feeling a surge of cold power coursing through my veins. Find out about his employment status. He claims to be a vice president. Verify it. If he is lying, I want proof. And David, contact the legal department. Tell them to draft a breach of contract suit regarding the unauthorized use of my collateral. Sir, that sounds aggressive, David noted. It is not aggressive, David, I said quietly. It is an eviction. I want to own him by dinner time. I want to hold the leash. Do not call me back until you have the papers ready to sign. I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I looked in the mirror one last time and adjusted my collar. I turned off the faucet. The sound of rushing water died, leaving only the silence of the house. I unlocked the door and stepped out. I was ready to go back to the party. I was ready to play the fool for a few more hours. But now I knew something they did not. The house they were standing in, the cars they drove, and the food they ate already belonged to me. They were just guests in my world, and their checkout time was approaching fast. After the disaster with the wooden truck, I retreated to the living room, feeling like a ghost in my own family. Lunch had been a quiet affair filled with the clinking of silverware and the heavy silence of unsaid words. I sat in the corner on a stiff armchair that was clearly designed for aesthetics rather than comfort, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea. I was waiting for the next blow. I knew it was coming. Hunter was not the type of man to let a $50,000 opportunity slip through his fingers, nor was he the type to let a perceived nuisance stay in his house for long. Sure enough, just as the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2, Hunter walked into the room. He had that same predatory smile plastered on his face, the one he wore when he thought he was closing a deal. He was holding a glossy brochure in his hand. He pulled up an ottoman and sat directly in front of me, invading my personal space. His knees almost touched mine. He leaned in close, and I could smell the stale coffee on his breath mixed with that expensive sandalwood cologne. "Horace," he began, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper, "Jasmine and I have been talking. We are so worried about you living alone in Chicago. It is not safe. What if you fall? What if you forget to turn off the stove? We would never forgive ourselves if something happened to you." He opened the brochure and smoothed it out on his lap. The front cover featured a stock photo of 2 elderly people with blindingly white teeth laughing while holding tennis rackets. Above them, in a cheerful font, were the words, "Sunny Hill Senior Living Community." "Look at this place, Dad," Hunter said, tapping the photo. "I did some research and pulled some strings. This is Sunny Hill. It is the premier facility in the state. It is not a nursing home, Horace. It is a resort. They have a movie theater. They have a heated pool. They have gourmet dining. It is full of people your age, retired doctors, lawyers, businessmen. You would fit right in. You would have friends again." He turned the page, showing me pictures of a manicured garden and a spacious dining hall. "And the best part is the medical care," Hunter continued, his eyes gleaming. "They have doctors on site 24/7. If your arthritis acts up like it did today, you get immediate attention. No more driving yourself to the pharmacy in the snow. You deserve this, Horace. You worked hard all your life. Let us treat you to some luxury." I looked at the brochure. I looked at the smiling stock photos. And then I looked at the logo in the bottom corner. A stylized yellow sun rising over a green hill. My blood ran cold. I did not need to read the text. I knew that logo. I knew that name. In the logistics business, you know everything about the supply chain. You know who ships what and where. 2 years ago, my company, Freeman Logistics, had been approached by a private equity firm that owned a chain of care facilities. They wanted a contract for the transport of medical waste and laundry services. That chain was Sunny Hill. I remembered the due diligence report my team had put on my desk. It was one of the few times in my career I had felt physically ill reading a business document. Sunny Hill was not a resort. It was a warehouse for the dying. It was a low-cost, high-volume facility notorious for understaffing and neglect. The report detailed lawsuits for wrongful death. It detailed health code violations for bedbugs and malnutrition. It described a place where seniors were sedated to keep them quiet so the night staff could sleep. It was a place where the state minimum for care was considered a goal, not a baseline. I looked up at Hunter. He was still smiling, pointing at a picture of a game room. "You would love the poker nights," he said. He was lying. Or maybe he just did not care enough to check. But looking at the desperation in his eyes, I knew the truth. He had chosen the cheapest place he could find, a place that would take my social security check and ask no questions. He was not trying to send me to a resort. He was trying to send me to a grave. He wanted me out of the way. He wanted me medicated and forgotten so he could strip mine my assets without interference. If I went into Sunny Hill, I would never come out. I would be another number in their system, fading away in a urine-scented hallway, while Hunter drove a new Porsche paid for with my life savings. The rage that surged through me was so intense my vision blurred for a second. I wanted to grab him by his cashmere collar and tell him that I owned the company that hauled away the dirty sheets from his precious Sunny Hill. I wanted to tell him that I knew exactly what kind of hell he was trying to sell me. But I forced myself to breathe. I forced my hand to stop shaking. I was not Horace the CEO right now. I was Horace the victim. "It looks expensive," I stammered, playing the part of the worried pensioner. "I do not know if I can afford a place like this, Hunter." Hunter's smile widened. He had been waiting for this objection. "That is where we come in, Horace," he said soothingly. "We have a plan. We have a—" He snapped his fingers and Jasmine appeared from the kitchen. She was carrying a leather portfolio. Her eyes were red and puffy. She had been crying, or at least she had been working hard to look like she had been crying. She sat down on the arm of Hunter's chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Daddy," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "we want you to be happy. We want you to be safe. But we know the cost is high. That is why we think it is time to sell the Chicago house." There it was, the end game. Hunter pulled a sheaf of papers out of the portfolio. He clicked a gold pen and held it out to me. "This is just standard paperwork," Horace Hunter said, casually breezing past the legal implications. "It is a power of attorney. It just authorizes me to handle the sale of your property and manage the funds for your care at Sunny Hill. We can use the $50,000 cash you brought for the deposit, and the house sale will cover the monthly fees for years. You will never have to worry about a bill again." I looked at the document. It was a full, durable power of attorney. If I signed this, Hunter would have total control over every dime I owned. He could empty my bank accounts. He could sell my stocks. He could sign my name to loans. He was asking me to hand him the keys to the kingdom I had built with 40 years of sweat and blood. Jasmine chimed in, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "Please, Daddy, do it for us. It is so hard worrying about you. I cannot sleep at night thinking about you alone in that big house. If you sign this, we can take care of everything. You can just relax. Please let us help you." It was a masterclass in manipulation. The bad cop offering the solution and the good cop offering the guilt. They were squeezing me from both sides, using my love for my daughter as a weapon against me. I reached out and took the pen. My hand was trembling, and this time I did not have to fake it. I was shaking with the effort of not striking my son-in-law across the face. I looked at the signature line. X marks the spot where Horace Freeman ceases to exist. X marks the spot where I become a ward of the state. I brought the pen tip down to the paper. I saw Hunter lean forward, his breath held, his eyes locked on the ink. He was so close, he could almost taste the money. Then I let the pen slip from my fingers. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, rolling under the chair. I can not, I whispered, burying my face in my hands. "What is wrong?" Horace Hunter asked, his voice sharp with frustration. "Just pick it up and sign. It is for your own good." "I am just so overwhelmed," I said, my voice muffling behind my hands. "It is Christmas, Mom's favorite holiday. I cannot sign away our home on Christmas. It feels like bad luck, like I am betraying her memory." Hunter let out a huff of annoyance. "Dad, it is just paper. It has nothing to do with Mom." But Jasmine hesitated. The mention of her mother struck a nerve, however small. "Maybe he is right, Hunter," she said softly. "It is Christmas Day. Maybe we can do it tomorrow." Hunter glared at her, then looked back at me. He saw an old man breaking down under the weight of grief. He saw a man who was weak and confused. He did not see the man who was calculating the exact moment to destroy him. "Fine," Hunter snapped, standing up abruptly. "Fine. We will wait. But first thing tomorrow morning, Horace, we are signing those papers. The deposit for Sunny Hill is due by noon. Do not make this harder than it has to be." He stormed out of the room, snatching the brochure from my lap as he went. Jasmine lingered for a moment, looking at me with a mixture of pity and impatience. "Get some rest, Daddy," she said, patting my arm. "We just want what is best for you." She followed her husband, leaving me alone in the silence. I bent down and picked up the gold pen from under the chair. I clicked it open and shut. And click, click, click. "Tomorrow morning," I whispered to the empty room. "Tomorrow morning you are going to get exactly what is best for you, Jasmine. And you are not going to like it one bit." I pocketed the pen. It was a nice pen. It would be perfect for signing the eviction notice I planned to serve them with dessert. The sun went down and the house began to fill with the soft golden glow of expensive lighting. But inside my chest, there was only darkness. I was sitting in the corner of the kitchen trying to stay out of the way of the caterers when Hunter walked in. He was holding something white and stiff in his hands. It was an old waiter jacket, the kind with the high collar and the brass buttons that looked like a costume from a bad movie. He tossed it onto the table in front of me. "Put this on," Horace Hunter said, not asking but commanding. I looked at the jacket and then up at him. Why, I asked, my voice steady. Because we are short-staffed, Hunter replied, adjusting his silk tie in the reflection of the microwave. One of the servers called in sick. I need you to help pass the hors d'oeuvres. It will give you something to do. You look bored just sitting there. Besides, it will keep you from talking to the guests too much. These are important people, Horace. I do not want you boring them with stories about rest stops and tire changes. I stood up slowly. My knees popped loudly in the silence of the kitchen. I reached out and touched the jacket. It felt cheap and synthetic. It smelled faintly of mothballs. He was not asking for help. He was establishing a hierarchy. He wanted his wealthy friends to see his father-in-law serving them. He wanted to reduce me from a family member to a servant. It was a power move designed to strip away the last shreds of my dignity before he stole my house the next morning. I could have refused. I could have thrown the jacket in his face and told him that I had employees who made more money in a week than he made in a year. But I remembered the plan. I remembered the audit my team was running right now. I remembered that pride is a luxury I could not afford if I wanted total victory. Sure, Hunter, I said, keeping my face impassive. I would be happy to help. I used to bus tables when I was 20. I know the drill. Hunter smirked. Good man. Just try not to spill anything on the carpet. The cleaning fee is astronomical. I put on the jacket. It was tight across my broad shoulders, the shoulders that had lifted heavy cargo for decades. I buttoned it up to my chin. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I did not look like a waiter. I looked like a man in a straitjacket. But as I smoothed down the front, I whispered to myself, this is not a uniform, Horace. This is camouflage. Tonight, you are not the prey. You are the spy. I picked up a heavy silver tray loaded with glasses of champagne and stepped out of the kitchen and into the lion's den. The living room was packed with people now. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the dull roar of meaningless chatter. I moved through the crowd with the practiced efficiency of a man who understands logistics. I weaved between groups offering drinks, collecting empty glasses, making myself invisible. And that is the thing about being a server. People do not see you. You become part of the furniture. And because they do not see you, they say things in front of you that they would never say in mixed company. I walked past a group of 3 young women standing by the fireplace. They were holding clutches that cost more than my first truck. I honestly do not know why we even tip anymore, one of them said, rolling her eyes. I mean, how hard is it to carry a plate? It is unskilled labor. Exactly, the second one chimed in. My Uber driver this morning tried to talk to me. I was like, dude, just drive. I am not paying you for your personality. I felt a surge of heat in my face, but I kept moving. I offered them champagne. They took the glasses without looking at me, without saying thank you, without even acknowledging that a human hand had served them. To them, I was just a floating tray. I moved to a group of men near the Christmas tree. They were all wearing suits that cost $5,000 and watches that cost $50,000. Among them was Hunter holding court, looking flushed and manic. So I told him, look, if you cannot make the mortgage payment, that is not my problem, Hunter was saying loudly. That is the beauty of the market, boys. Winners win and losers get foreclosed on. It is natural selection. The men laughed, clinking their glasses. Brutal Hunter, one of them said. I love it. I stood right behind Hunter, my tray trembling slightly. He was talking about me. He was bragging about foreclosing on losers while planning to steal my home the very next day. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it like bile. These people with their soft hands and their inherited money, they thought they were the masters of the universe. They thought their wealth made them superior. But I looked around the room and I saw nothing but emptiness. I saw people drowning in debt to impress people they did not like. I saw a room full of shiny, beautiful rot. I moved through the crowd, listening to them complain about their maids, their nannies, their personal trainers. I heard them mocking the poor, mocking the working class, mocking the very people who built the roads they drove on and cooked the food they ate. It was a master class in ignorance. And my son-in-law was the ringleader. He was desperate to be one of them. He was selling his soul and his family just to get a seat at a table where he was clearly the jester. Then the front doorbell rang. A hush fell over the room. Hunter's head snapped up. His eyes went wide with panic and excitement. He is here, Hunter whispered to Jasmine. It is him. Hunter straightened his tie, smoothed his hair, and rushed to the door like a puppy hearing a treat bag open. He threw the door open and a blast of cold air swirled into the room, followed by a man who radiated actual power. It was Arthur Sterling. I knew Arthur, not socially but professionally. He was the CEO of Sterling Capital, the parent company of the firm where Hunter was a low-level analyst. Arthur was a legend in Chicago, a man of old money and old-school principles. He was tough, fair, and incredibly sharp. We had sat across the negotiation table from each other 5 years ago when my logistics company signed a massive distribution deal with his manufacturing division. Hunter was practically bowing as he took Arthur's coat. "Mr. Sterling, sir, thank you so much for coming. I know how busy you are. It is an honor, truly an honor." Arthur looked around the room with a polite but bored expression. He was a shark swimming in a pool of guppies, and he knew it. "Merry Christmas. Callaway," Arthur said, his voice deep and gravelly. "You promised me that 2015 Margot. That is the only reason I am out in this snow." "Right this way, Sir," Hunter said, ushering him into the room. "I have a glass waiting for you." Hunter led Arthur through the crowd, parting the guests like Moses parting the Red Sea. He was beaming. This was his moment. Having the CEO at his party validated his entire existence. Hunter stopped right in front of me. He did not look at me. He just snapped his fingers at my face. "Champagne," Hunter barked. "For Mr. Sterling. And be quick about it, Horace." Arthur Sterling turned to look at the waiter. He reached out his hand to take the glass. Then he froze. His hand stopped in midair. His eyes, which had been glazed over with boredom, widened in genuine shock. He looked at my face. He looked at the cheap white waiter jacket. Then he looked back at my face. He recognized the scar on my chin from a loading dock accident in '82. He recognized the steel in my eyes. "Mr. Freeman." Arthur stammered, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Horace? Is that you?" Hunter let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, sorry, Mr. Sterling. This is just my father-in-law, Horace. He is a retired truck driver. He is helping us out tonight. He is a bit slow, but he means well." Arthur ignored Hunter completely. He was staring at me as if he had seen a ghost. He knew exactly who I was. He knew I was worth 10 times what everyone in this room combined was worth. He knew I could buy his company with a phone call. "Horace," Arthur said, taking a step back. "What on earth are you doing wearing that?" I locked eyes with him. I kept my face completely stone. I slowly raised my index finger to my lips. "Shh." It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of a command. Arthur stopped mid-sentence. He looked from me to Hunter, then back to me. He was a smart man. He realized instantly that a game was being played, a dangerous game, and he realized that his ambitious little employee Hunter was unknowingly standing on a landmine. I see," Arthur said, swallowing hard. He straightened his posture. He looked at me not as a waiter, but as an equal. Then, to Hunter's absolute confusion, Arthur Sterling bowed his head slightly. It was a mark of deep respect. "Thank you, sir," Arthur said, taking the glass from my tray with both hands. "It is good to see you." Hunter looked between us, his brow furrowed. He laughed nervously again. "You know him, sir. Did he used to deliver packages to your office or something?" Arthur took a long sip of champagne, his eyes never leaving mine. "Something like that, Callaway," Arthur said, his voice dry. "He delivered quite a lot. You are a lucky man to have him in your house." Hunter puffed out his chest, missing the point entirely. "Yes, well, we like to take care of family, even the ones who need a little extra help." I watched Arthur choke back a laugh or maybe a gasp of horror. I gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. Then I turned and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd, leaving the CEO of Sterling Capital looking terrified for the future of his employee. The trap was set. And now I had a witness. The party had moved past the polite cocktail hour and settled into that dangerous phase where men with too much money and too much scotch start measuring their egos against one another. Hunter stood in the center of the living room with his back to the roaring fire. He held his crystal tumbler like a scepter, commanding the attention of the room. I stood in the periphery near the entrance to the kitchen, holding a silver tray of empty glasses, acting the part of the silent, invisible servant. But my ears were tuned to a frequency that Hunter did not even know existed. He was not just bragging about his golf handicap or his new car anymore, he was talking business. And when men like Hunter talk business, they are usually talking about destroying something beautiful to make a quick buck. "Gentlemen," Hunter announced, his voice booming with unearned confidence. "You are looking at the man who is about to close the deal of the century. We have been looking at a legacy target in the transportation sector, a A real dinosaur of a company called Bluebird Logistics. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Bluebird. My hands tightened around the handles of the serving tray. Hunter did not know that Bluebird was the very first subsidiary I had acquired 30 years ago. He did not know that I named it Bluebird because that was the song my late wife Lucille was humming the day I signed the papers. It was not just a company to me. It was the heart of my Midwestern operations. It was a fleet of 500 trucks driven by men and women I knew by name. It was a company that offered full benefits and college scholarships for the drivers' children. And now my son-in-law was standing in my living room holding a drink paid for, with my money talking about it like it was a carcass he was waiting to butcher. It is a classic case of bloat. Hunter continued taking a swig of his drink. They have got overhead you would not believe. Pension plans, health insurance that covers dental. Can you imagine? They are running a charity, not a business. But the infrastructure is solid. The routes are gold. So here is the plan. We acquire it, we strip the assets, and we terminate the workforce. The other men in the room nodded, sipping their drinks approvingly. One of them, a hedge fund manager with cold eyes, asked the question that made my blood boil. What about the drivers? The union will be a nightmare. Hunter laughed. That is the best part. We do not need the drivers. We are pivoting to automation. We are going to replace those steering wheel monkeys with AI-assisted logistics and autonomous cabs within 5 years. In the short term, we fire the senior staff, the ones making the high wages, and we bring in independent contractors at minimum rate. No benefits, no liability. We cut the operating costs by 40% overnight. We flush the monkeys, and we keep the circus. Monkeys. He called them monkeys. I felt a heat rise up my neck that had nothing to do with the fireplace. I thought of Big Mike, who had driven for Bluebird for 20 years and had just put his daughter through nursing school. I thought of Sarah, who drove the night shift so she could take care of her sick mother during the day. These were people with calloused hands and aching backs who kept this country moving. They drove through blizzards and heat waves. They missed birthdays and anniversaries to ensure that shelves were stocked and packages were delivered. And here was this boy in a $2,000 suit who had never done a day of physical labor in his life, calling them monkeys. He was talking about destroying their livelihoods just to bump up a stock price by a few points. The silver tray in my hands began to vibrate. I was gripping it so hard that my knuckles had turned completely white. I wanted to march into the center of the room and smash the heavy silver platter across his smug face. I wanted to scream that he was talking about my family. I wanted to tell him that the only monkey in the room was the one wearing the Italian loafers, but I did not move. I could not move. Not yet. I had to let him dig the hole deeper. I had to let him show Arthur Sterling and the rest of the world exactly who he was. I looked over at Arthur. The CEO was standing by the window, swirling his drink, but he was not looking at Hunter. He was looking at me. He saw the rage in my eyes. He saw the way I was standing, my posture shifting from servant to warrior. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was a signal. Hold the line, Horace. Let him hang himself. It takes a special kind of arrogance to think you can replace human experience with an algorithm, Hunter said, his voice dripping with condescension. These old truckers, they think they own the road. They think because they know a shortcut through Nebraska that they are indispensable. But they are obsolete. They are just meat in the seat. The future is code, gentlemen. The future is pure profit without the headache of human error. He paused for effect, waiting for applause. And he got it. The room chuckled. They toasted to the future, to the profit, to the end of the working man. Then Hunter's eyes landed on me. He needed a punchline for his joke. He needed a prop to illustrate just how superior he was to the dinosaurs he planned to extinguish. Take my father-in-law here, Hunter said, pointing his glass at me. The room turned. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me, standing in the shadows in my ill-fitting waiter jacket. Horace drove a truck for 40 years, Hunter sneered. Look at him. He is a relic. Hey, Horace, do you even know what AI is? Do you know what an algorithm does? Or do you still think the cloud is just something that rains on your picnic? The room erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, sharp sound. They were laughing at my gray hair. They were laughing at my silence. They were laughing at the idea that a man like me could ever understand the complexities of their world. Hunter grinned, basking in the adulation. He thought he had scored a point. He thought he had elevated himself by stepping on my neck. I slowly walked forward. The laughter died down not because I asked for silence, but because there was something in my walk that commanded it. I did not walk like a servant. I walked like a man who owns the ground he steps on. I stopped 3 feet from Hunter. I looked him up and down, taking in the expensive suit, the manicured nails, the emptiness behind his eyes. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the low rumble of a diesel engine idling in the dark. "I know what AI is, Hunter," I said. "It is a tool, just like a hammer. And like a hammer, it is only as good as the hand that holds it." Hunter rolled his eyes. "Oh boy, here comes the folk wisdom. Spare us the Cracker Barrel philosophy, Horace." I ignored him. I looked around the room, making eye contact with every man who had laughed. "You talk about drivers like they are parts of a machine," I continued. "You call them monkeys. You talk about cutting roots to save money. But you forget one thing about nature." I took a step closer to Hunter, forcing him to look up at me. "A tree without roots falls the moment the wind blows," I said. "And when it falls, it does not matter how shiny the leaves are. It hits the ground just the same." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The guests shifted uncomfortably. They looked at their drinks. They looked at the floor. Hunter's smile faltered. For a split second, he looked afraid. He looked like a child who had poked a sleeping bear and watched one eye open. But his arrogance was too strong. He shook his head and let out a scoff. "Yeah, well, thanks for the gardening tip," Horace Hunter said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "Why do not you go get us another bottle of scotch? The roots can wait. We have celebrating to do." I held his gaze for 1 second longer. A second that felt like an hour. "Enjoy the celebration." "Hunter," I said softly. "Enjoy it while it lasts." I turned and walked back to the kitchen. I did not get the scotch. I walked past the pantry. I walked past the catering staff. I went straight to the back door and stepped out into the cold night air. I took out my phone. I had a text message from my assistant David. It was a photo of a document. It was the purchase agreement for the debt on Hunter's house. And underneath it was a confirmation that we had successfully acquired 51% of the voting stock in Hunter's own firm. I looked back through the window at Hunter laughing and pouring drinks. He was celebrating the death of Bluebird. He did not know that Bluebird had just eaten him alive. I put the phone away and took a deep breath of the winter air. It smelled like snow. It smelled like pine. And for the first time in 2 days, it smelled like justice. The party finally died down around midnight. The last of the luxury cars crunched over the snow in the driveway, and the heavy front door thudded shut for the final time. I lay on my cot in the basement listening to the silence returning to the house. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a crime scene after the sirens have faded. My body was exhausted from the physical humiliation of serving drinks to people who looked through me, but my mind was wide awake. I was replaying the insults in my head. I was replaying the way Hunter had called my employees monkeys. I was replaying the way Arthur Sterling had looked at me with that mixture of shock and respect. I stared up at the exposed wooden beams of the ceiling, counting the cobwebs. I was waiting. I knew Jasmine would come. She was the weak link in this chain. Hunter was a narcissist incapable of guilt, but Jasmine still had a conscience even if it was buried under layers of fear and greed. She would come to justify herself. She would come to rewrite the narrative so she could sleep at night. Sure enough, around 1 a.m, the door at the top of the stairs creaked open. A sliver of light cut through the darkness. Jasmine descended the stairs slowly, holding a mug of tea. She was wearing her silk robe and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. In the dim light, she looked like the little girl I used to tuck in at night, the girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee. But that girl was gone, replaced by this stranger who stood shivering on the concrete floor. "Daddy, are you awake?" she whispered. I sat up, pulling the thin blanket around my shoulders. "I am awake, Jasmine. It is hard to sleep when you are freezing." She winced at my tone but came closer, handing me the mug. It was chamomile tea, my favorite, a peace offering. "I brought you something warm," she said, sitting on the edge of the cot. Her weight made the rusty springs groan. "I am sorry about tonight. I know Hunter can be intense. He just gets so stressed. You have to understand, Dad. The pressure he is under is immense. He is managing millions of dollars. He is responsible for so many people. Sometimes he just needs to blow off steam." I took a sip of the tea. It was hot, but it did not warm the ice in my chest. She was lying to herself. She was reciting the script Hunter had written for her. "He is not managing millions, Jasmine," I said softly. "He is an analyst. He inputs data. And tonight he insulted the very people who built this country. Do you really believe that calling workers monkeys is just blowing off steam?" Jasmine looked away, pulling her robe tighter. "You do not understand the corporate world, Dad. It is a dog-eat-dog world. You have to be tough. Hunter is just trying to secure our future. That deal with Bluebird Logistics is going to change everything for us. Once he gets that promotion, we can pay off the house. We can start a college fund for Leo. We can finally breathe." I looked at her at the desperation in her eyes. She was betting everything on a horse that had already broken its leg. She did not know that I was Bluebird. She did not know that her husband was trying to butcher her father's legacy to pay for his own mistakes. "Jasmine," I said, putting the mug down on the floor, "Hunter is not going to get that promotion, and he is not going to close that deal." She stiffened. "Don't say that. You don't know him. You don't know how talented he is." "I know enough," I said. "But that is not why you are here, is it? You did not come down here at 1 in the morning to talk about business strategy. You came here because you need something." She bit her lip. Tears began to well up in her eyes again. It was always tears with her, a weapon of defense. "We are in trouble, Dad," she confessed, her voice cracking. "Real trouble. The bank called yesterday. If we do not make a significant payment by the end of the week, they are going to start foreclosure proceedings. Hunter did not want to tell you, he is too proud. But I am terrified. If we lose this house, if we lose our status, I do not know what he will do. He might leave me." She reached out and took my hand. Her palms were clammy. "That is why we need you to sign those papers tomorrow," she pleaded. "Please, Dad. Sell the Chicago house. Give us the money. Consider it an investment in your family. We will pay you back, I promise. Once the Bluebird deal goes through, we will pay you back with interest. Just save us, please." I looked at my daughter. I saw the fear, but I also saw the selfishness. She was asking me to set myself on fire to keep her warm. She was asking me to give up the home I shared with her mother, the home where she grew up, just to feed the beast that was destroying her marriage. She was not asking for help. She was asking for a sacrifice. I gently pulled my hand away from hers. I needed to ask the question, the one question that would determine everything. "Jasmine," I said, looking her straight in the eye, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. What if I say no?" She blinked, confused. "What? What if I refuse to sign?" I continued, my voice steady and calm. "What if I tell you that I need my house, that I need my money for my own care? What if I say that I am not going to bail Hunter out of his mess this time? What happens then?" She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She had not considered this possibility. In her mind, my assets were already theirs. But you have to," she stammered. "You are my father. You have plenty of money. You do not need that big apartment." "That is not the question, Jasmine," I pressed. "I am asking you what happens to me. If I do not give you the money, do I still have a place in this family? Can I still stay here? Will you still take care of me? Or does my value to you depend entirely on my signature?" The silence that followed was heavy and terrible. It stretched out for 10 seconds, then 20. I could hear the wind howling outside the small basement window. I could hear the refrigerator humming upstairs. I watched her struggle. I watched her try to find a lie that would sound like the truth, but she could not find one. She looked down at her lap. She picked at a loose thread on her robe. She took a deep breath. "This is Hunter's house, Dad," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He makes the rules. If you cannot contribute, if you are just going to be a burden, then I do not think he will let you stay." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if a physical knife had been twisted between my ribs. It was the death of hope. She had said it. She had chosen. She would throw me out into the snow. She would send me to that hellhole nursing home. She would erase me from her life if I did not pay the ransom. She did not say it was her decision. She hid behind her husband. But her silence was her signature. She was an accomplice to my execution. I nodded slowly. The pain began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The father in me died in that basement. The CEO took over. "I understand," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I understand perfectly." "You will sign then?" she asked, looking up with sudden hope. I looked at her one last time. "Adanado." I memorized her face. This was the last time I would ever see her as my daughter. From this moment on, she was a defendant. "Go to bed, Jasmine," I said. "Go upstairs to your warm bed. We will settle everything in the morning." She hesitated, sensing the shift in my tone, but she was too relieved to question it. She stood up, smoothing her robe. "Thank you, Daddy," she said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. Her lips felt cold. "You are doing the right thing. You are saving us." She turned and walked up the stairs. She closed the door behind her, and I heard the lock click. She locked it. She locked her own father in the basement. I waited until I heard her footsteps fade away down the hall. I waited until the house was completely silent again. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my satellite phone. The screen glowed bright in the darkness, illuminating the cracked concrete walls of my prison. I pulled up the contact for my personal attorney, Saul Cohen. Saul was a pit bull in a suit. He had been with me for 30 years. He knew where all the bodies were buried because he had helped me dig the graves. I began to type. My thumbs moved quickly over the keypad. I did not need to think about the words. I had been composing them in my head all night. To Saul Cohen, urgent. Initiate Plan Omega immediately. I hit send. Then I typed a second message. Execute full foreclosure on the Callaway residence. Serve papers at 0800 hours. Have the eviction team on standby. Freeze all assets associated with Hunter Callaway. And Saul, bring the file on the Bluebird acquisition. I want to sign the rejection letter personally. I hit send again. I put the phone down on the crate beside the cot. I lay back on the thin mattress. I was still cold. My knee still throbbed. I was still sleeping in a basement. But I felt a strange sense of peace. It was the peace of the executioner who knows that the sentence is just. They wanted my money. They wanted my legacy. They wanted to strip me bare and leave me to rot. Well, tomorrow morning they were going to get exactly what they wished for. They were going to get the full weight of the Freeman Empire crashing down on their heads. I pulled the scratchy blanket up to my chin and closed my eyes. I needed to sleep. I needed to be rested, because tomorrow was Christmas, and I had a lot of presents to deliver. Christmas morning arrived with a blinding white glare from the snow outside reflecting off the pristine marble floors of the living room. The air smelled of cinnamon and expensive coffee, but the atmosphere was thick with a tension that no amount of holiday jazz could mask. We gathered around the 12-foot tree. Leo was already tearing into a mountain of gifts, ignoring everyone else. Jasmine sat on the sofa clutching a warm mug, her eyes avoiding mine. Hunter sat in his leather armchair looking like a king on his throne, impatient to get the unpleasantness over with so he could get back to his scheme. "All right, let us get this over with," Hunter announced, clapping his hands together. "We have a busy day ahead. Lots of paperwork to sort out, right, Horace?" He gestured to a small pile of gifts in the corner. There was nothing there for me except 2 items that looked like afterthoughts. Hunter reached behind the tree and pulled out a large, dusty object. He slid it across the floor toward my feet. It was a suitcase. "Merry Christmas," Horace Hunter said with a smirk. "I noticed the duffel bag you came in with was looking a little ragged. I found this in the attic. It is vintage, a solid piece of luggage for a man on the move." I looked down at the suitcase. It was not vintage. It was garbage. It was an old, scratched-up hard shell case that Hunter had used during his college days. One of the wheels was missing. The leather handle was cracked. It was empty and it smelled of mildew. The message was loud and clear. "Pack your things, old man. You are leaving." "Thanks, Hunter," I said, my voice flat. "It is very practical." Jasmine stood up then. She handed me a small, soft package wrapped in generic paper. "Here, Daddy," she said softly. "I hope they fit." I unwrapped it. Inside were 3 pairs of gray wool socks. There was a bright orange sticker on the packaging that she had forgotten to peel off. It read, "Clearance 3 for $5. I held the socks in my hands. My daughter, who wore diamond earrings and drove a Range Rover, had spent $5 on her father for Christmas. She had spent more on the ribbon for the dog's present. "They are warm," I said, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Jasmine." Hunter checked his watch. "Great. Glad you like them. Now, Horace, about those papers for the house sale. We should really get started before noon." I raised a hand, stopping him. "Wait," I said. "I did not have time to go shopping because of the storm. But I did bring something for you. 2 envelopes. I reached into the inside pocket of my waiter jacket, which I was still wearing because Hunter had insisted I look presentable. I pulled out the 2 thick white envelopes I had prepared the night before. They were heavy. They were sealed with wax. "One for you, Jasmine," I said, handing it to her, "and one for you, Hunter." Hunter took his with a greedy grin. "Is this the $50,000 you talked about?" he asked, tearing at the flap. "Cashier check, I hope." "Open yours first, Jasmine," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave. Jasmine looked at me, surprised by the authority in my tone. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out a stack of documents. "What is this?" she asked, frowning. "These look like bank statements." "Read them," I said. She began to read. Her eyes scanned the columns of numbers. Date, January 1st, 2018. Deposit $3,000. Source, Freeman Trust. Date, February 1st, 2018. Deposit $3,000. Source, Freeman Trust. She flipped the page. The amounts grew. $5,000 for a car repair. $10,000 for a wedding venue deposit. "I do not understand," she said, her voice trembling. "These are our accounts." "But where did you get these? And what is the Freeman Trust?" "Hunter told me his investments paid for all of this." I stood up slowly. My knees did not hurt anymore. The adrenaline of justice was a powerful painkiller. "Hunter lied to you, Jasmine," I said. "The Freeman Trust is me. For 5 years I have been depositing money into your accounts every month. I paid for your car. I paid for your wedding dress. I paid for the down payment on this house. I did it anonymously because I wanted you to think your husband was successful. I wanted you to be proud of him." Jasmine turned pale. She looked at Hunter, who had stopped opening his envelope and was staring at me with his mouth open. "You paid for it," she whispered, but Hunter said, "He said he was a genius trader." I walked over to her and tapped the last page of the document. "Read the last line, Jasmine." She looked down, her breath hitched in her throat. "Status of beneficiary terminated. Account frozen. Effective immediately." She looked up at me, and I saw the realization crash into her like a freight train. She realized that the old truck driver she had treated like a servant was actually the financial engine of her entire life. She realized she had just kicked her own safety net out from under her. "Daddy," she stammered, tears filling her eyes. "I did not know. Please, we cannot survive without that money." I turned my back on her. "You should have thought about that before you gave me discount socks and told me I was a burden." I turned to Hunter. He was clutching his envelope, his face a mask of confusion and rising panic. "Your turn, Hunter," I said. "Open it." He hesitated. His hands were shaking. He ripped the envelope open. He pulled out a single document. It was not a bank statement. It was a legal summons on heavy bond paper with the seal of the state court at the top. "What is this?" Hunter whispered, his voice squeaking. "It is a forensic analysis of a mortgage application," I said, stepping closer to him until I was looming over his chair. I reached out and took the paper from his trembling hands and held it up for Jasmine to see. "Look at the signature at the bottom, Jasmine. It says Horace Freeman. It authorizes a second mortgage on my house in Chicago to secure a loan for Hunter Calloway." Jasmine gasped. "But Daddy, you said you did not sign anything yesterday." "I did not," I said, my voice cold as ice. "And I did not sign this 3 months ago either." I looked at Hunter. His face had gone from pale to a sickly gray. Sweat was beading on his forehead, dripping down his nose. "That is my name, Hunter," I said. "But that is not my handwriting. You forged my signature. You stole the deed to my home and you used it as collateral for your bad debts. That is not just a lie, Hunter. That is a felony. It is called wire fraud and aggravated identity theft." Hunter tried to stand up, but his legs gave out and he collapsed back into the chair. "Horace, wait," he stammered, wiping the sweat from his upper lip. "We can explain. I was going to pay it back. It was just a bridge loan. I was going to tell you. Tell me when I roared. When the bank came to evict me. When I was thrown out on the street." I leaned down close to his face, so close I could see the terror in his pupils. "The envelope also contains a copy of a police report," I said. "It was filed this morning by my attorney." And that sound you hear outside. We all froze. Through the thick windows we could hear the distant wail of sirens getting closer. "That is not Santa Claus, Hunter. That is the consequences of your actions coming to collect." Hunter dropped the papers. They scattered on the floor, mixing with the wrapping paper of the cheap suitcase he had given me. He looked at Jasmine, pleading for help, but she was backing away from him, looking at him like he was a stranger. "You forged his signature," she whispered. "You stole his house." I looked at the two of them. the ungrateful daughter, and the criminal son-in-law. The beautiful picture-perfect family was dissolving right before my eyes, revealing the rot underneath. "Merry Christmas," I said, straightening my waiter jacket. "I hope you like your gifts, because unlike the garbage you gave me, mine are going to last a lifetime." The silence in the room shattered instantly like a dropped mirror. Hunter stared at the police report lying on the floor, and I watched his face undergo a terrifying transformation. The blood drained from his cheeks only to rush back in a violent shade of purple. His eyes bulged and his mouth twisted into a snarl that was purely animalistic. He was a trapped rat, and like all trapped rats, he decided to bite. He looked at the ruined papers, then he looked at Jasmine, who was backing away from him in horror, and finally his gaze landed on me. "You set me up," Hunter screamed. His voice was raw and guttural, tearing through the festive atmosphere of the morning. "You senile old man. You came into my house, you ate my food, and you planted this. You are trying to frame me." He took a step toward me, kicking the pile of gift wrap aside. His hands were curled into fists. The veneer of the civilized businessman was gone completely. The expensive suit could no longer hide the thug underneath. "You think anyone will believe you?" He spat venom flying from his lips. "You are nobody. You are a washed-up truck driver. I am a vice president. I am the future. You are just dirt. That is all you are. Dirt under my shoe." He lunged forward, grabbing a heavy crystal decanter from the sidebar. He was not thinking anymore. He was reacting with pure blind rage. He raised the heavy glass bottle above his head, intending to bring it down on my skull. "I should have thrown you out in the snow the minute you got here," Hunter roared. "You and your whole kind. You are all the same. Mooching off us, dragging us down. You belong in the gutter. Horace and I am going to put you there personally." Jasmine screamed. "Daddy, look out!" Hunter swung the decanter with all his might. It was a blow meant to kill, or at least to maim. It was the desperate act of a man who realized his life was over and wanted to take everyone else down with him. In that split second, I saw the hatred in his eyes. It was not just anger about the money. It was a deep-seated racial hatred that he had kept hidden under a layer of politeness for years. He hated me because I was black and successful. He hated me because I had dignity. And now he wanted to break me physically because he could not break me financially. But he made a fatal mistake. He assumed that because I was old, I was weak. He assumed that because I walked with a limp, I was slow. He forgot that for 40 years I had loaded crates that weighed more than he did. He forgot that my muscles were built from steel and sweat, not from an hour at an air-conditioned gym. As his arm came down, I did not flinch. I did not cower. I stepped into the blow. I raised my left arm, blocking his forearm with the hardness of an iron bar. The crystal decanter flew from his hand and smashed into the wall, exploding into 1,000 shards. Before he could recover, I grabbed his wrist with my right hand. My grip was like a vice clamp. I squeezed. I felt the delicate bones of his wrist grind together. Hunter let out a high-pitched shriek of pain. "Let go! You are breaking my arm!" I did not let go. Instead, I twisted. I used the momentum of his own attack to spin him around, forcing his arm behind his back. I kicked the back of his knee and he crumbled. The arrogant master of the universe dropped to the floor with a heavy thud. His face pressed against the Persian rug he had bought with my money. I stood over him. I was not hunching anymore. My arthritis was forgotten. I stood at my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I expanded my chest, filling the room with my presence. I looked down at him, struggling like a worm on a hook. "You call me weak," I said, my voice low and vibrating with power. "You call me dirt. Listen to me, boy. I was driving 18-wheelers through ice storms in the Rockies while you were still suckling at your mother's breast. I have changed tires in sub-zero temperatures. I have fought off hijackers in Detroit. Do not ever mistake silence for weakness. And do not ever mistake patience for fear." I pulled his arm up higher toward his shoulder blade. He cried out again, tears of pain streaming down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. "Please," he sobbed. "Please stop. You are hurting me." "I am not hurting you, Hunter," I said, tightening my grip just enough to remind him who was in charge. "I am restraining you, because if I actually wanted to hurt you, you would not be crying. You would be unconscious. You wanted to play with the big boys, right? You wanted to be a tycoon. Well, this is what happens when you steal from the big boys. We do not just sue you, we crush you." Jasmine was huddled in the corner, her hands over her mouth, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. She had never seen this side of her father. She had only known the gentleman who paid the bills. She had never met the man who built an empire in a cutthroat industry. She was seeing Horace Freeman, the CEO, for the first time, and it terrified her. Suddenly, the front door burst open with a crash. Police. Nobody move. 3 officers in tactical gear stormed into the room, guns drawn. Behind them walked a tall man in a sharp wool coat carrying a briefcase. It was Saul Cohen, my attorney. He looked at the scene, the broken glass, the crying man on the floor, and me standing calm and victorious. Saul did not look surprised. He just nodded. "Officer, that is him," I said, calmly nodding at the man beneath me. "Hunter Calloway. I am holding him for assault with a deadly weapon and suspect flight risk." The officers moved in quickly. One of them tapped me on the shoulder. "We have got it from here, sir. Please step back." I released Hunter's arm. He slumped forward, gasping for air, cradling his injured wrist. The officers hauled him up roughly. He could barely stand. His legs were shaking so bad he looked like a marionette with cut strings. They shoved him against the wall and pulled his hands behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut, click, 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 was the sweetest music I had heard all Christmas. "You have the right to remain silent," an officer recited, dragging Hunter toward the door. Hunter looked back at me. His eyes were wild, desperate. "Jasmine, tell them," he screamed. "Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them I am your husband. Call my lawyer. Call Arthur Sterling." Jasmine did not move. She did not speak. She just watched as the man she thought was her prince was revealed to be a frog in handcuffs. Saul walked over to me and handed me a handkerchief. "You are bleeding, sir," he said, pointing to a small cut on my cheek from the flying glass. I wiped it away without flinching. "It is nothing, Saul. Just a scratch. Did you bring the papers?" Saul opened his briefcase and pulled out a fresh document. "The eviction notice. Served at 0800 hours as requested," Saul said. I took the paper and walked over to where Hunter was being led out. I stood in front of him, blocking his path. The officers paused. Hunter looked up at me. He was broken. The arrogance was gone, leaving only a pathetic emptiness. "Dad," he whispered. "Please. I am not your dad." I said, my voice cold and final. "And you are not a vice president. You are a criminal. And this house." I looked around the room at the tree, the fireplace, the expensive furniture. "This house is now under the management of Freeman Logistics. You have exactly 0 minutes to vacate the premises." I stuffed the eviction notice into the pocket of his ripped shirt. "Get him out of my sight, officers," I said, turning my back on him. As they dragged him out into the snow, into the waiting squad car, I heard him start to cry. It was a loud, ugly sound, the sound of a man who realized too late that he had bet against the house and lost everything. I walked over to the window and watched the flashing blue and red lights reflect off the snow. The mask had fallen. The play was over. And the old truck driver was the last man standing. 2 days is a long time to spend in a holding cell, especially when you are used to sleeping on Egyptian cotton sheets. Hunter Calloway was released on bail at 8 in the morning, his parents having put up their own retirement home as collateral. A smart man would have gone home. A smart man would have called a criminal defense attorney and started preparing for the fight of his life. But Hunter was not a smart man. He was a desperate man. And a drowning man will grab the blade of a sword if he thinks it will keep him afloat. He believed that his life was a separate balance sheet from his career. He convinced himself that if he could just close the massive Bluebird Logistics acquisition today, he would get his 6-figure bonus. With that bonus, he could pay off the debts, make the fraud charges disappear, and perhaps even talk his way back into Jasmine's good graces. It was the delusion of a narcissist who refuses to accept that the world does not revolve around him. I sat in the corner of the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor watching the security feed on a tablet. I watched Hunter run into the lobby of Sterling Capital. He looked like a wreck. His expensive suit was wrinkled from 2 days in police custody. His hair was greasy. His eyes were wild and bloodshot. He did not swipe his badge because I had deactivated it an hour ago, but I had instructed the security guards to let him pass. I wanted him to come up. I wanted him to walk into the trap willingly. He practically sprinted to the elevator, pushing past secretaries and junior analysts who stared at him in open shock. They had all read the news. They knew about the arrest, but Hunter did not notice them. He was muttering to himself, rehearsing his pitch, clutching a briefcase that contained nothing but his own delusions. "He thinks he can still save it," Arthur Sterling whispered. Arthur was sitting to my right, looking pale and shaken. He had spent the last 48 hours reviewing the files I had sent him. He now knew that his star employee was a fraud, and that his company was now effectively my subsidiary. "Let him come up." "Arthur," I said, my voice calm, "a man should be allowed to attend his own funeral." I turned the high-backed leather chair around so I was facing the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the Chicago skyline. I wanted my back to the door. I wanted him to feel the disrespect. The elevator doors down the hall dinged. Heavy, hurried footsteps pounded against the plush carpet. Then the double doors to the boardroom burst open. "I am here," Hunter shouted, breathless and manic. "I am here. Do not worry, Arthur." It was all a misunderstanding, a family dispute. I can explain everything. But first we have to close the Bluebird deal. I have the papers right here. He rushed into the room, slamming his briefcase onto the mahogany table. The sound echoed in the vast space. "Gentlemen," Hunter said, panting, trying to smooth his wrinkled jacket. "I know things look bad, but I have the seller of Bluebird Logistics ready to sign. They are desperate. I squeezed them. I got the price down by 15%. This deal is going to make us millions. It is going to save the quarter." He stopped. He finally realized that nobody was speaking. The room was filled with the 12 board members of Sterling Capital. Usually these meetings were loud, chaotic affairs with people shouting over each other. Today it was silent as a crypt. The board members sat with their hands folded on the table, staring down at their notepads. None of them would look Hunter in the eye. Hunter looked at Arthur Sterling. Arthur was staring at his coffee cup, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Arthur," Hunter said, his voice trembling slightly. "Why is it so quiet? We need to sign this." "The seller is waiting." Arthur slowly raised his head. He looked at Hunter with a mixture of pity and disgust. "The seller is not waiting, Hunter," Arthur said softly. "The seller is here." Hunter frowned, confused. He looked around the room, scanning the faces of the board members. "Here? What do you mean here? I do not see anyone from Bluebird. It is just us." Arthur pointed a shaking finger toward the head of the table, toward the high-backed leather chair that was turned away from them. Hunter followed the finger. He stared at the back of the chair. He saw the smoke from a cigar rising slowly into the air. "Who is that?" Hunter asked, a note of fear creeping into his voice. "Is that the CEO of Bluebird?" He took a step closer, trying to regain his confidence. He adjusted his tie. Sir Hunter addressed the chair, loud and brash. "I am Hunter Calloway. I am the vice president leading this acquisition. I am glad you could join us. I have the contracts ready. We are prepared to offer you a fair price for your assets, but you have to understand that your company is outdated. We are doing you a favor, taking it off your hands." I took a long drag of my cigar, letting the smoke fill my lungs. I savored the moment. I savored his ignorance. He was trying to negotiate with the executioner. "You think my company is outdated?" I asked, my voice deep and unrecognizable without the fake tremble of age I had used for days. Hunter blinked. He did not recognize the voice. It sounded powerful, resonant. "Well, yes," Hunter stammered. "Your drivers are inefficient, your pension obligations are heavy, but we can fix that. We are going to modernize you." "I see," I said. "So you plan to fire my drivers? The monkeys, as you called them." Hunter froze. The color drained from his face. He remembered that word. He remembered where he had used it. "Who are you?" he whispered. I reached out and stubbed the cigar into the crystal ashtray. I placed my hands on the armrests of the chair. I was not wearing the waiter's jacket anymore. I was wearing a custom-tailored Brioni suit made of midnight blue wool. On my left wrist sat a Patek Philippe Grand Complication, a watch worth more than Hunter's entire life earnings. I slowly spun the chair around. The mechanism was silent. The motion was smooth. I faced him. Hunter's knees gave out. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land, but no sound came out. His brain simply could not process the image in front of him. He was looking at the old truck driver. He was looking at the man he had forced to sleep in the basement. But this man was glowing with power. This man was a king. "Hello, son-in-law," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a razor blade. Hunter made a choking sound. "Horace. Mr. Freeman." Arthur Sterling corrected him sharply. "You will address the chairman as Mr. Freeman." Hunter looked wildly from Arthur to me. "Chairman, what is going on? Why is he sitting there? Arthur, tell him to get out. Arthur looked at Hunter with dead eyes. He owns the building, Hunter. He owns the company. We work for him now. I leaned forward, steepling my fingers. The gold cufflinks on my shirt caught the light. You said you wanted to buy Bluebird Logistics, I said calmly. You said you wanted to strip it for parts. You said the owner was desperate. I stood up. I did not need a cane. I walked around the table, moving toward him. The board members shifted in their seats, terrified of getting in my way. I am Bluebird Logistics Hunter, I said. I founded it 40 years ago with one truck and a dream. I built it into the empire that you so arrogantly thought you could steal. I stopped right in front of him. I could smell the fear on him. It was a sour, acrid smell. You tried to buy my own company with my own money, I continued. You forged my signature to get a loan to buy a business that I already own. Do you understand the level of stupidity required to achieve that? It is almost impressive. Hunter shook his head, tears streaming down his face. No, he sobbed. It is not possible. You are a truck driver. You are poor. I saw your shoes. I saw your truck. I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. Rich is loud, Hunter. Wealth is quiet. You were so busy looking at my shoes that you never looked at my hands. You were so busy judging my past that you never checked my portfolio. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out a document. It was the acquisition contract he had prepared. You wanted to close the deal, I said. You wanted a signature. I took the expensive fountain pen from his pocket, the one he had planned to use to sign his victory. I uncapped it. I will sign it, I said. Hunter's eyes lit up with a flicker of insane hope. You will. I placed the document on the table. I wrote one word across the front page in large bold letters, rejected. Then I signed my name underneath. Horace Freeman, chairman of the board. I tossed the pen back to him. It bounced off his chest and clattered to the floor. The deal is dead, Hunter, I said. And so is your career. Arthur Sterling stood up, clearing his throat. Hunter Calloway, he announced, reading from a prepared statement. Effective immediately, your employment with Sterling Capital is terminated for cause. Security will escort you out. Hunter looked around the room, begging for an ally, but there were no allies. There were only people who wanted to distance themselves from the carcass. But my bonus, Hunter wailed. I need the bonus. The bail bondsmen. The lawyers. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. You do not need a bonus, Hunter. You need a public defender. Because when you leave this building, the FBI is waiting in the lobby. I gave them the full audit of your accounts this morning. Hunter stared at me. The reality finally settled in. The crushing absolute weight of his defeat. Why, he whispered. Why did you let me go this far? Why didn't you stop me sooner? I straightened my tie, checking my reflection in the polished wood of the table. Because I wanted to see how much rope you would take, I said. And you took enough to hang yourself twice. I gestured to the door. Goodbye, Hunter. Try not to trip on your way out. It is a long way down from the top. 2 security guards stepped forward and grabbed him by the arms. This time, he did not fight. He did not scream. He just hung his head and let them drag him away. He was a shell of a man, a paper tiger that had been burned by a real dragon. I turned back to the window, looking out at the city I had helped build. The boardroom was silent again. Shall we continue the meeting, gentlemen? I asked, turning back to the table. Arthur Sterling scrambled to open his notebook. Yes, Mr. Freeman. Whatever you say, Mr. Freeman. I sat down in the chairman's chair. It was comfortable. It felt like justice. The security guards had their hands on Hunter's arms, ready to drag him out of the boardroom like a piece of unwanted office furniture, but I raised my hand one last time. Wait, I said. The single word stopped them in their tracks. Hunter looked back at me, his face streaked with tears and snot, a flicker of pathetic hope lighting up his eyes. He thought perhaps I had found a shred of mercy in my heart. He thought that maybe the old grandfather who carved wooden trucks was still in there somewhere. He was wrong. The grandfather was gone. The only man left in the room was the chairman of the board, and the chairman had one final piece of business to conduct. Bring him back to the table, I commanded. The guards shoved Hunter forward. He stumbled and caught himself on the back of a leather chair. He looked small. He looked cheap. It was amazing how quickly the aura of a man dissolves when you strip away his credit limit. There is one more thing you need to understand, Hunter, I said, leaning back in my chair and steepling my fingers. You kept asking why I let it go this far. You kept asking why I did not stop you when you first mentioned the Bluebird deal. You thought I was reacting to you. You thought I was playing defense. But you made a fundamental error in your analysis of the battlefield. I stood up and walked over to the window looking out at the sprawling Chicago skyline. The city looked cold and hard under the winter sun. You see, Hunter, I continued, keeping my back to him. When you started digging into Bluebird logistics, you triggered a dormant clause in my holding company's bylaws. It alerted me that Sterling Capital was looking to make hostile moves in my sector. So while you were busy forging my signature and planning your little victory party, I was busy making some calls of my own. I turned around to face him. I did not just block your deal, Hunter. This morning at 9 o'clock, while you were sitting in that holding cell waiting for bail, I executed a leveraged buyout of a controlling interest in this firm. Hunter blinked his brain, struggling to process the words. What firm, he whispered. This firm, I said, spreading my arms to encompass the room. Sterling Capital. I bought 51% of the voting stock. I am not just the owner of the company you wanted to buy. I am the owner of the company you work for. I am the boss of your boss. I own the chair you are standing next to. I own the computer you use to commit fraud. I own the very air you are breathing right now. Hunter looked at Arthur Sterling for confirmation. Arthur could not even look him in the eye. He just nodded slowly, staring at his hands. It is true, Calloway, Arthur said, his voice hollow. Mr. Freeman is the majority shareholder. He owns everything. Hunter let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. It was the sound of a mind snapping. You bought the company. You bought the whole company just to fire me. I walked back to the table and picked up a piece of heavy cream-colored paper. I bought the company because it was a good investment, I said. Cleaning out the rot is just a bonus. I placed the paper in front of him. It was a termination notice. This is your official notice of termination for cause, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. But do not think this ends with you losing your job. If it were just incompetence, I might have let you walk away with a severance package. But you stole from me. You stole my identity. You stole the deed to the home where I raised my daughter. And that, Hunter, is something I cannot forgive. Hunter reached for the paper, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. I will pay you back, he babbled, his words tumbling out over each other. I will work. I will get another job. I will pay you every cent, Horace. Just do not ruin me. Please. If you fire me for cause, I will never work in finance again. I leaned across the table, my face inches from his. You will never work in finance again anyway, Hunter, I said. Because where you are going, the only economy is cigarettes and ramen noodles. I signaled to Arthur Sterling. Mr. Sterling, if you please. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick legal file. We have already filed a formal complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission, Arthur said, reading from a script I had prepared for him. We have also turned over all internal communication logs to the FBI regarding your wire fraud and embezzlement. Our legal team will be seeking the maximum penalty and full restitution of all misappropriated funds. Hunter looked at the file. He saw the logo of the FBI. He saw the seal of the federal court. The reality of prison finally crashed down on him. It was not a theoretical threat anymore. It was concrete walls and steel bars. No, he screamed, dropping to his knees. No, you cannot do this. We are family. Horace, please. Think of Jasmine. Think of Leo. You are going to send the father of your grandchild to prison. I looked down at him, kneeling on the expensive carpet. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just the cold, hard certainty of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. You should have thought of Leo when you taught him to hate his own grandfather, I said. You should have thought of Jasmine when you gambled her future on a lie. You destroyed this family, Hunter. I am just sweeping up the broken glass. I looked at the security guards. Take him out. As they grabbed him again, the double doors at the far end of the room flew open with a bang. Wait. It was Jasmine. She was breathless, her hair wild, her coat buttoned wrong. She had obviously run all the way from the lobby. She saw Hunter on his knees. She saw the guards. She saw me standing at the head of the table in my tailored suit. She froze. Daddy, she gasped. What are you doing? Hunter saw her and renewed his struggles. Jasmine, help me. He is crazy. He bought the company. He is sending me to jail. Tell him to stop. Tell him we are sorry. Jasmine rushed forward, her eyes wide with panic. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. "Daddy, please stop this," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "This has gone too far. You made your point. We learned our lesson. Please let him go. He is my husband. He is all I have." I looked at her hand on my sleeve, the same hand that had given me discount socks on Christmas morning, the same hand that had signed the checks paid for with my money while she looked down on me. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between us that mirrored the emotional chasm she had created years ago. "You learned a lesson, Jasmine?" I asked. "What lesson is that? That you can treat people like dirt until you find out they are rich. That you can throw your father in a basement until you realize he holds the checkbook. That is not a lesson. That is just opportunism." Jasmine sobbed, shaking her head. "No, that is not it. I love you, Daddy. I always loved you. I was just scared. Hunter made me do it." I looked at Hunter, who was now weeping openly on the floor. Then I looked back at Jasmine. "He did not make you do anything," I said. "You are a grown woman, Jasmine. You made a choice every single day. Every time you laughed at his jokes about me, you made a choice. Every time you apologized for my presence to your friends, you made a choice. And last night, when I asked you if I had a place in your home without my money, you made your choice." I walked over to the table and picked up the rejected contract. "You chose him," I said, holding up the paper. "You chose the lifestyle. You chose the image. You chose the lie. And now you have to live with it." Jasmine reached for me again, falling to her knees beside her husband. "But we will lose everything," she wailed. "The house, the cars, our friends. We will have nothing." I looked down at the two of them huddled together on the floor. They looked like refugees from a disaster of their own making. "You will have each other," I said. "Is that not what family is about? Or was that just another lie you told me to get my signature?" I pressed the intercom button on the table. "Security, send up 2 more officers. I have intruders in the boardroom." Jasmine looked at me in shock. "You are calling security on me, on your own daughter." "I am calling security on the wife of an embezzler who is trespassing on private property," I said, my voice flat. "You are not my daughter today, Jasmine. My daughter was a sweet girl who loved wooden trucks and hot cocoa. I do not know who you are, but you are trespassing in my building." The elevator dinged again and more guards appeared. They lifted Hunter and Jasmine to their feet. They were not gentle. To the guards, these were just criminals who had upset the chairman. "Get off me," Jasmine screamed, struggling. "Daddy, please." "I have nowhere to go." I turned my back on them. I walked to the window and looked out at the gray sky. "You have a husband, Jasmine," I said without turning around. "I suggest you ask him for a plan. I hear he is a financial genius." As they were dragged, screaming from the room, I felt a heavy weight lift from my shoulders. It was the weight of obligation. For years I had carried them. I had protected them from the consequences of their own mediocrity. I had let them feed on me because I thought that was what love required. But I realize now that I was wrong. Love requires truth. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people fall so they can finally learn how to stand up. The doors closed, cutting off their screams. The boardroom was silent again. Arthur Sterling cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Freeman," he asked, his voice tentative, "what do we do now?" I turned from the window. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked at the terrified board members. "Now, Arthur," I said, sitting down in the head chair. "Now we get back to work. I believe we have a logistics company to run and a lot of dead weight to cut loose." Meeting adjourned. It has been exactly 365 days since the storm that changed everything, and as I sit here watching the snow fall on Chicago, I can finally say that the air feels different. It is cleaner, lighter. The past year has been a brutal lesson in cause and effect, a masterclass in the laws of physics applied to the human soul. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Hunter and Jasmine pushed me with greed, and I pushed back with justice. I drove my truck past the county detention center this morning. I did not go inside. I had no reason to. Hunter Calloway is currently serving year 1 of a 7-year sentence for federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. My lawyers tell me he spends his days working in the prison laundry, earning 12 cents an hour washing the clothes of other men. It is a poetic sort of justice. The man who called honest laborers monkeys is now learning the value of hard work the hard way. He sent me a letter last month. It was 4 pages of excuses and begging. He asked for money for the commissary. He said the food was terrible. He said he missed his wine. I read it once, then I fed it into the shredder in my office. I did not reply. Silence is the only answer treason deserves. After passing the prison, I stopped at a discount grocery store on the south side of the city. I pulled my hat down low and walked to aisle 4. I stood behind a display of canned soup and watched. There was a woman at the cash register wearing a faded blue smock with a name tag that hung crookedly on her chest. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. It was Jasmine. I watched her scan items for a rude customer who was on her phone, ignoring Jasmine completely. "Paper or plastic?" the customer snapped. "Plastic is fine," Jasmine mumbled, her voice devoid of the arrogance that used to define her. She fumbled with a bag of apples and dropped one. It rolled across the floor. "Oh, for God's sake," the customer sighed, rolling her eyes. "Can you not do anything right? Hurry up, I have places to be." I watched my daughter, the woman who used to throw dinner parties where she mocked the poor, scramble onto her hands and knees to chase a runaway apple. She looked defeated. She looked broken. She was living in a small one-bedroom apartment near the airport, working double shifts just to keep the lights on and pay for Leo's school supplies. I felt a twinge of pity in my chest. It was a natural instinct for a father. I could walk over there right now. I could write a check that would solve all her problems. I could buy the store and fire the rude customer. But I stayed where I was. I gripped the handle of my shopping cart until my knuckles turned white. If I saved her now, I would be robbing her of the most important education of her life. She needed to know what it felt like to be invisible. She needed to know the weight of a dollar earned by standing on your feet for 8 hours. I watched her finish the transaction, hand the receipt to the customer, and force a tired smile. She was surviving. She was learning. And that was more valuable than any inheritance I could give her. I turned my cart around and walked out of the store without her seeing me. Her redemption, if it ever comes, must be earned, not bought. I got back into my truck and drove to the one place that brought me genuine joy. I pulled up to the small rental house where Jasmine lived. I honked the horn twice. The front door flew open and a blur of energy in a winter coat came running out. Grandpa Leo sprinted across the snowy lawn and jumped into my arms. I caught him swinging him around, ignoring the ache in my back. He was heavier than last year, taller and stronger. "Are we going fishing, Grandpa?" he asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "We sure are, Leo," I said, putting him down. "Go get your gear." A year ago, this boy would not touch me because he thought I was dirty. A year ago, he was glued to an iPad mimicking his father's sneer. But today he was wearing muddy boots and a hat I had knitted for him. I had fought hard in family court for visitation rights. Jasmine had no money for lawyers, so she had to agree. Every weekend, Leo was mine. And every weekend, I worked to undo the poison his father had injected into his mind. We drove out to the frozen lake near the cabin I had renovated. The air was crisp and cold, biting at our cheeks. We set up our chairs on the ice and drilled a hole. I handed Leo the bait. It was a worm wriggling and covered in dirt. "Remember what I told you, Leo?" I asked. He looked at the worm. He did not flinch. Not. He picked it up with his bare fingers. "I remember, Grandpa," he said, hooking the worm expertly. "You said dirt washes off, but a bad soul stays dirty forever." I smiled, feeling a lump form in my throat. "That is right. And what about work?" Leo dropped his line into the dark water. "Work is how we build things," he recited, serious and focused. "Work is honor, and nobody is better than anyone else just because they have more toys." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the wooden truck, the same one he had thrown into the snowbank last Christmas. I had cleaned it, polished it, and kept it safe. "I think you dropped this," I said, handing it to him. Leo looked at the truck. He ran his thumb over the smooth oak fender. He looked up at me and I saw tears in his eyes. "I am sorry, Grandpa," he whispered. "I was stupid back then. It is a beautiful truck." "Did you really make it with your hands?" "I did," I said, placing my hand on his shoulder. "And one day I will teach you how to make one too. But first you have to learn to drive the real thing." He grinned. The Freeman legacy was safe. It skipped a generation, but it landed on solid ground. We sat there for hours, catching nothing but cold, but catching everything that mattered. I looked at my grandson, and I saw the future. He would not be a soft man like his father. He would be a man of substance, a man of character, and that was worth more than all the companies in my portfolio combined. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in streaks of purple and orange, we packed up our gear. I drove Leo back to his mother, dropping him off with a hug and a promise to return next Saturday. I watched him run inside, waving until the door closed. I climbed back into my Ford F-150. To the outside observer, it looked like the same old beat-up truck from last year. The paint was still faded. The bumper was still dented. But they did not know what was under the hood. Over the summer, I had spent $50,000 customizing the engine. It now housed a turbocharged diesel beast that could outrun a sports car and tow a house. It had heated leather seats installed inside the worn-out cabin. It had a satellite radio system hidden behind the dashboard. It was just like me. Unassuming on the outside, but powerful beyond measure on the inside. I turned the key and the engine roared to life, a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through the steering wheel. I shifted into gear and pulled out onto the highway. The road ahead was clear. The snow had stopped falling. I thought about Hunter in his cell. I thought about Jasmine scanning groceries. I thought about Arthur Sterling, who now called me every morning for approval before making a decision. And I thought about Leo holding that wooden truck. I had been tested. I had been underestimated. I had been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love me, but I had not broken. I had stayed true to the code of the road. Keep your eyes forward. Keep your hands on the wheel. And never let anyone drive your vehicle for you. I rolled down the window, letting the cold air rush in. It did not feel bitter anymore. It felt like victory. I turned up the volume on the radio, letting the sound of an old blues song fill the cab. The winter is over, I said to the empty road, a smile spreading across my face. I pressed down on the accelerator and the old truck surged forward, leaving the past in the rearview mirror where it belonged. My name is Horace Freeman. I am a truck driver. I am a father. I am a grandfather. And I am finally free. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you think Jasmine deserves a second chance, or if she made her bed and needs to sleep in it. And remember, no matter how cold the winter gets, the spring always comes for those who hold their ground. Until next time, keep driving. I learned that you cannot buy respect, and you certainly cannot inherit character. For years, I thought I was protecting my family by shielding them from struggle, but in reality, I was only feeding their entitlement. True wealth is not found in a bank account or a designer label. It is found in the calluses on your hands and the integrity in your heart. Sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is close his checkbook to open his children's eyes. A legacy built on lies will always collapse, but a foundation built on hard work and truth will weather any winter. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and redemption. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Jasmine, or did she get exactly what she deserved? I read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.